Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Riverwalk Talk. My name is Chip Harrington. I'm your host of this, podcast or show, don't know what you want to call it. Today I'm kind of taking my show on the road a little bit. I am actually down in Springfield, walking along the Connecticut River, and that is what Springfield police have been chasing around for the last 6 years. We're down in Springfield in the south end to talk about all things this part of the city and some real interesting history that this part of the city has as well. So many of you, if you grew up in this area, certainly may associate the south end with a lot of great restaurants, a lot of interesting people, but also there has been a faction of organized crime, the mafia in Springfield. And over the years, people have known about it, we've talked about it, but in more recent time, it has become something where people are talking about on podcasts, and a lot of the country is taking a lot of interest in this part of the country and its association with organized crime. So I figured one way to really kind of find out what's really going on, or has happened in the past, is to talk to somebody who was kind of very much involved, Mr. Anthony Arillotta.
How you doing?
How are you, man?
Good, I'm good, Chip.
Let's put you over here on this side, because I get my mic over there. So. Yeah. I was just saying at the top of the show there, so what I do here, this little podcast, is I do it in Ludlow typically. We walk along the river, but this is actually perfect as well too. Just kind of talk about all sorts of things. You have a pretty interesting past. Actually, you and I have some things in common. Number one, both went to Cathedral, same class, class of 86.
Yeah.
We both got invited not to return to Cathedral. Yeah. You your freshman year, me my sophomore year.
Oh yeah.
You got involved in organized crime. I became a little local politician, which many people think is also organized crime in many ways.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen you. Over. I do remember, like, when we were freshmen, got to know some people, and I when I heard your name back in the day, I'm like, I think I know that guy. And then when I looked it up, I'm like, yeah, I went to high school with him for a very short minute.
Time, yeah.
Yeah. So let's start walking and start talking about all sorts of things around here. So say, we're down here in the south end, heading more towards downtown right now. This is actually, I've never been back.
Great day for a walk and talk.
It really is. It's an awesome day. And thank God these microphones work good, because there's a lot of outside noise too.
Yeah.
But I've never been down here. This is actually really cool that this Riverwalk exists down here.
Yeah, when I came home from prison in 17, I used to walk this.
Yeah, good way of kind of relieving some stress and getting back to things.
Getting back into society,
Yeah, so let's go back to a little bit to the beginning. So your family's been in town for a long time, the Arillotas. I mean, your dad had a market. Everybody knew it. Real popular. A lot of people went there. So how long has your family been in the city?
Well, on my father's side, my grandparents came from Italy. So my father was the first generation born here. And my mother's side, it goes back, her father was born in Italy. So, I would say that makes me second generation. Yeah. Right? From, and they originally came to New York, my grandfather. Okay. Then they, came to Springfield on both sides. My father's side is from Calabria, my mother's Naples. And they've been here since, I want to say the 20s. I think my grandfather got here maybe in around 14 or somewhere along those.
Here in Springfield?
Here in Springfield.
Okay.
And then, so they've been around, since the early 1920s. And my grandfather got into the produce business later on, which is come to, my father took it over, which was the fruit and produce store. Yeah, and your dad really that business really blew up. He had a lot of interest over there. Yeah, he was ahead of his time with that. He was, I always say, like a Costco before Costco. If he had a bigger store, he would have been just like a Costco. Yeah. And this was back in the 70s. He was one of the largest small businesses, what you could call it. He was doing 70, 80,000 a week. Wow. Back in the 70s. Wow. And I used to help him count the money as a young kid. Straightening it out, putting the 10s and the 5s and the 20s together. Yeah. And it was mostly the poor people would go there. Immigrants, poor people, they could get, 5 times the product for the money.
Because he was doing such high volume.
Yeah, he was, his prices, you go to the store and you buy bananas, his were 5 pounds per dollar. You go to the grocery store, 99 cents a pound. Yeah. And so, $100 at my father's store, you'd have to spend $400 or $500 at the grocery stores.
Yeah.
So, he sold, 6, 7 trailer loads of produce.
Wow.
And then, wine grape season, he sold 35, 40 trailer loads of wine grapes during that season. So, yeah, he took it to a whole new level.
Yeah. Yeah, it was certainly, well, even though I'm a kid from Ludlow, but certainly people knew about your dad's place out there. So
Yeah.
you're always kind of known as kind of a scrappy kid, kind of gotten yourself little fights occasionally here and there.
Right.
Was it known or in your mind early on that you're like, yeah, okay, there's a legitimate business I can get into. My dad's got this great business, but there's this whole other allure out there that maybe is better suited for my personality.
I was just, a young kid, wild kid, like I'm sure yourself got in trouble getting into some fights and things like that.
Yep.
Ever since as a young kid. And I went to Mount Carmel. We used to fight all the time there. So I was, like a wise guy, like to, bust balls and have fun and always getting into trouble. So it was just in me to be like that. Nothing bad, just fights and everything like that. And so, and I never, the Italian mafia, the presence of it, and especially you were born here in this area, the presence back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, were enormous. Like if you were Italian, you couldn't escape not knowing
Who the players were.
all the players.
Yeah.
I was related to some of them. They were at my house. They used to frequent my father's store. So you always knew their presence, and my grandparents would say, oh, they're not good people, to stay away, but they always respected them. They come into the store, they catered to them. So it always got you thinking like, they got shown, respect, they dressed well, they had money. I used to go to Mount Carmel School, not too far away.
Yep.
That was like where their headquarters was in Springfield. My uncle was the driver for the boss, Sam Kafari, Big No Sam.
Yep.
So I was always hanging around as a young kid. He'd give me $20, play the games. And
$20 was a lot of money back then too.
Yeah. So, the presence of it was always there. And I never thought about, and as a young kid, the reason they said they were bad is because they were killers.
Yeah.
You had to be a killer to get into that organization. And I always wondered if I was capable of killing at a young age. I always thought that. Not that I was thinking of joining, just, was I capable of committing murder for the organization? And so, but that was just young, when I ended up picking what was better for my career, working for my father or working on I call it the streets, not even the mafia, because I made lots of money
on your own,
my own on the streets.
Yep.
And I was working for my father, and that is backbreaking, brutal work. I respect the working man, especially my father. He got up at 4:30 in the morning, didn't get home till 6, tired. I wanted him to play sports, and he was, was tired, and so I really respect the fact that what he did for our family, and I respect all the working men because I made easy money, and I was working for him when I came home from prison in the 90s, and I would work 80 hours and get paid like $400.
Yeah,
and I'm telling you, back-breaking work, So I said, Dad, I'll be back in an hour. And I went and sold. I made a lot of connections while I was in prison. And a lot of it was in the marijuana business, which is legal today and everything. We know.
That must blow your mind, right?
Yeah.
You went to prison for that.
Well, I didn't go for prison for marijuana, but I got arrested for it and things like that. And
now it's legal
today.
Again.
But they considered it a lesser charge, and they didn't really go hard on marijuana distributors unless you were committing violence.
Sure. Yeah.
So I went and sold 10 pounds of marijuana in 1991. I came back, I made $4,000 profit, and I'm back breaking my back unloading wine grapes.
Right.
40-pound boxes, sack them 7 high, 280 pounds.
For a couple $100 a week.
Yeah, so it's like, that was kind of like an easy decision, making in an hour's time 4,000 or working 80 hours and making 400.
Yeah. No.
And so that's how I ended up getting into the street rackets.
Right.
And then later on, that around that same time, you're working the streets, you can't avoid the mafia, especially being Italian, especially being, like you said, a little violent and getting
Yeah.
into fights. They love that stuff.
Yeah, you had a little reputation on the street. So what did you go to? You went to this upstate prison the first time. What year was that?
1990.
1990. What was that for?
I got arrested in '89, but I was on probation, and I pled guilty to it, and it was a shooting case. I ended up getting 5 years with mandatory 1 because of the gun.
Yep.
Which I ended up going back 2 more years. So, violating parole law, with getting into other fights.
Yeah.
I violated. So it was from like 90 to 93 was
Right.
when I was in prison, like 2 of the 3 years there.
So you're, let's see, early 20s, 24, 21 to 24, something like that. Was that first bid you did upstate kind of like graduate school for the criminal mindset?
For me, it was the best. I always say it was the best year that I did because it taught me to be independent, fend for myself instead of living at home.
Yeah.
You got a roof over your head, food on the table. You don't have to work if you don't want to. You're living at home, and you go to prison and you have to be a man now, especially a state prison, and
Right.
you worked in that industry. I mean,
Yep.
it was, especially back then, very violent prisons and everything in Mass. Walpole was the most dangerous prison
In the
I think
country.
in the
In the
country.
country,
at one
yeah.
point,
That was 70s, 80s, early 90s. Yep, for sure.
Yeah. So,
So you really got an education there. You really kind of, you made some connections.
I met my first cellmate ever going into state prison was a guy doing a natural life. He could never get out.
Yep.
And it's funny because I went in 1990. I ended up going back to prison in 2005, and the same guy's still there.
Oh, yeah?
A lot of guys were there. My friend Jimmy Rodwell, he's doing a natural life.
Yeah.
I met him in 1990. He's still there to this day.
Yeah.
And so you meet a lot of contacts, and a lot of these guys can't come home, so they give you their contacts on the street because they want someone sending them money
Yep.
and things like that. So I made a lot of contacts with the Irish and Italians in Boston, and mostly in the marijuana field. And I just came out of prison running. I mean, I thought it was, they weren't looking for marijuana dealers. They were looking for cocaine, crack. Crack started getting big then.
Really big.
And heroin. And the marijuana, the cops would hear, what's he do? Oh, he's selling a little marijuana. They don't realize I'm selling hundreds of pounds of marijuana a week. And they're thinking like, oh, marijuana, there's no money in it, things like that. And they just let you go. They not let you go. They just don't pay attention to you. They want the coke guys, the heroin guys, the crack guys. Not that I didn't mess around with some coke, never crack or heroin, but my biggest, back then was the marijuana. And I made a lot of contacts. That's, the connections there,
Yeah, and you were never really a user, right?
Never.
I mean, you
used
said you
drugs.
smoked weed a couple times. You just
When I
wasn't
was
your thing.
younger, and it got me, when we were young, we used to smoke and make you laugh.
Yeah.
It was kind of funny, and that was once in a great while. But then, it didn't agree with me.
Yeah. So you were it was truly an entrepreneurship for you.
Oh yeah.
Was
all
there
about the business and the quality of the marijuana and how much I could sell it for and make
making
profit.
the money? Yeah, making the turn. Was there ever a time where you're sitting in a 6x6 cell and you're kind of like, all right, maybe my parents are right. Maybe I should go legit. Was that ever an option for you?
Nah, because I would go back and live the same life I did, and as far as the crimes about money.
Yeah.
And all those crimes that we committed, money crimes, they're not unethical, against, like, say, nasty crimes. Marijuana is legal today.
Yeah.
We made millions with that. Sports gambling,
Legal.
You can go to the bank and borrow money from the bank. Well, we
Legal.
can give you money legal. The casinos, they're everywhere now, legal. So I would go back and do the same life that I lived, except I would not join the mafia and commit violent acts for, those violent acts.
Yeah.
And when I say violent, the murders. Violent, you get into a fight, things like that happens.
Yeah,
But
when
I'm
you're
saying,
taking somebody's life.
taking someone's life,
Yeah.
your life is over. You don't realize it, but the moment you take someone's life, even if you don't get caught, your life is over because the law enforcement scrutiny you're going to get after, because if you're a suspect, you're not going to be able to survive. Eventually, they're going to keep hitting you like they did with me. 3-year sentences,
Yeah.
cases one after another.
Yeah, you
piled
become a
up.
habitual offender at that point.
And you can't earn. Even if they don't catch you for the murder, they're going to keep coming after you for crimes that they would have never came after you before
Yeah.
if you didn't participate in the violence.
Yeah, you're in that.
So I would go back for the business part of it, and then branch off into real estate, other legitimate businesses,
Yep.
and somehow, some way, I would have just got away from the mob, which would have been very hard to do back then.
Yeah.
They're just not going to let you go, and they work with the DAs themselves. They'll tell the cops on you, like they've done to other people here, the Campidis and the Puglianos and all that side. If you weren't working with them, they would tell their contacts in law enforcement,
Yep.
and they would be targeted.
Right. Hey, let's spin around here. We'll kind of we'll turn
So-
around and go back the other way. So you bring up a really interesting point. I want to get to that, but the fact that you're able to sit here and talk to me openly about this, you're in Springfield,
Right.
you're out in the open.
Right over here.
Yeah,
I always like Springfield.
downtown. But typically somebody who's a made man steps away from the lifestyle. They disappear forever, kind of a thing. So,
right.
but we'll get into that. So Springfield specifically is more associated, or always has been associated, with the Genovese crime family. I think Lucky Luciano was one of the founders of it. Vito Genovese, Vincent Giovanti.
Yeah.
How did they get established here in northern Connecticut and western Mass? Do you know?
Yeah, so there was like crews that they had in New York, and one of the individuals that came here was Miranda.
Yep.
But Springfield had a large presence of organized crime prior to that.
Okay.
It's just, the mafia wasn't formed yet. So there wasn't families at that time, but there was
Like
loaded
gangs.
with organized crime criminals, Italian criminals that were murders, back in the bootlegging days.
Okay.
And it wasn't until later that some of the immigrants that came to New York that settled in Springfield, the Miranda family was a big family. When everything formed in territories, Springfield was formed under that, like you said, Luciano, Costello, Genovese, that faction, because they were affiliated with them. So Springfield became a hub for called the Genovese crime family, and for a faction of it. And that's pretty much how it got formed in Springfield.
Okay. So fast forward to, Big Nose Sam.
Right. And he took over in the 30s.
In the 30s. He brought it right up to like the 80s or something
80,
like that, right?
I think he died in 83.
Right, exactly.
And never went to prison. He ruled with an iron fist, and he was loved by the everyday man, woman. They all loved him.
Right.
Respected him, and they feared him.
Right, which is when you're a boss like that, that's kind of the sweet spot you're trying to find, right?
He was both liked, loved, and feared, whereas like a Skyball Schiavelli was just feared.
Okay.
They hated him, but he was just, he was feared. Bruno was liked, and he wasn't as much feared as he was liked business-wise, not in the circles of the mafia.
Yeah. Right. So those three. So you got Big Nose Sam, Skyball Schiavelli, Big Al Bruno.
Babbitt, Schiavelli, Anthony DeLavo. I mean, there was a lot of them, but yeah.
Yeah, and then
Like Anthony DeLavo was feared. He wasn't liked.
okay. So you were pretty tight with Al Bruno.
Yeah.
You were pretty. You guys had this on and off again kind of. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, right?
Yeah.
But how did you so you get out of prison? How did you eventually get yourself connected to Al, where you eventually become a made man?
He approached, I always knew him since a little kid. I always liked him. I always liked, admired him. And he was flashy. He was the type of gangster that I liked.
Yeah.
Dress nice, smoke cigars, womanize, live good, eat good, drink good. Everything that I liked is what he was about. And Anthony DeLavo liked me as well, but he was just, the total opposite of that.
Okay.
Drive a dirty truck and, wear jeans and things like that. And so Bruno was more my type, but they both wanted me to be with them at a young age. I came home in prison in 91 and Bruno showed up first. Anthony's wife used to write me letters in prison. Anthony wants to see you when you come home, things like that.
Yep.
And so Bruno was the first one. He was just coming out of prison too, and he shows up at my house and he wanted to know about the shooting case and the gun and all that stuff. And then he says, you want me to be with me? And he went to, Skyball was the boss at the time, and he officially put me on record with the Springfield faction of the Genovese crime team.
So you're just at this point, you're just kind of just a soldier, right?
An
You're just kind of
associate, but I'm more than an associate because I'm on record as, with them. An associate's just, anybody can be. You could be an associate doing business or anything like that. But when you're on record, it's more than that because, you're a 10-minute ceremony away from being a made guy.
Yeah, exactly. And I get what was most attractive about you is that you were an earner. You were out there making bucks. I know, granted, it was through the weed and business, and I know
it was everything, but weed was the most of it, and that was 90% of what I made was mine. I mean, the stuff that I did, the sports gambling, some loan sharking, the mob rackets, the numbers. That's what I did with Bruno and the Genovese faction. But everything else, hijacking trucks, robberies, big jewelry heists, things like that. Anything else I did, that was 100% my money.
Right. But at the time, and I've watched you a couple of things, Bruno used to refer to it as like narcotics, even though, weed was not a narcotic at all.
Narcotics, right.
And that was kind of frowned upon, right? As far as getting in
drugs.
The drug business.
And it was really frowned upon because they didn't get any of the money. If they knew how much money I was making in the marijuana business, they would have wanted to kill me or figure out a way to link up and try to earn off some of that. But they were just too old school. They didn't know they didn't evolve with the times. I mean, marijuana was, you get caught with 50 pounds or less in Massachusetts, it's a misdemeanor charge, which I did get caught with 40 pounds. And I was in district court.
Yeah. So it was, for somebody who's already been upstate, you're kind of like, this is a walk in the park
kind of
thing.
Yeah, it was like, you're facing nothing. And you do the risk reward. So if I didn't get into the violence, all those rackets that I told you about will net you millions of dollars a year. And you don't probably, if you get caught, you're not going to go to prison. You're going to get probation. Yeah. If there's no violence.
Yeah. So, so Al's now the boss. He's kind of in charge of Springfield.
In 01, he becomes boss.
In 01. You're an associate with him.
Yeah.
How does it evolve where...
And I'm a proposed now guy with him. Proposed means when the books are ready and they're ready to make some guys, that you're going to be on the list proposed to get made with them.
So you have to take trips down to New York to kind of make, have these official meetings? It sounds like it's
you don't have
structure.
to, but we do go. I did go down there all the time, sometimes 2-3 times a week with Bruno. He used to send a lot of tribute and Christmas time with gifts. No money, but gifts, wine, cigars, cognacs, all kinds of foods. Fill up a van and send it. So I was at, the Gigante's homes and restaurants and other powerful captains in the family. Yep. And then we would always be going down there to eat dinner with those people. Yeah. And talking business, especially when Bruno became boss. We were down there all the time. So I met a lot of, and it's funny because I met so many of those guys when I was supposedly shelved from the mafia. And I met them on my own. Doing my business in rackets, along those same lines.
So you were kind of walking not a fine line, but you were kind of living in two different worlds, in Al's world and then your own world.
It was risky. You look back, I could have got killed. In fact, Bruno threatened to kill me when I got caught with the marijuana. And because I wasn't a made guy yet, but still, he put me on record, and I put him in a situation because his bosses might think that he was earning with me.
Because he's supposed to be in control of you.
He's supposed to, know what I'm doing.
Yeah, okay.
So they probably think he was earning with me.
Sure.
Which he wasn't.
Okay. All right, so that's a period of time you're doing that. You're kind of hustling, working it. In order to become a made man, at least, listen, I'm going by The Godfather and everything that, I'm an Irish kid from Ludlow, what do I know? But you got to commit some real act of violence to kind of really become proposed for to be a made man. Was that true back then?
Yeah, so when it existed, mafia existed, when I was coming up, you had to kill. It wasn't just violence. We're all capable of violence, but to get that button, to get formally inducted into the mafia, you had to participate in a murder. Yeah. And that was a rule that existed all the way up. That's how I ended up getting made. When I did, you had to participate. You could be a driver. You could dig a hole and get rid of the body, but you had to participate in some point of the murder to get made. Today it doesn't exist like that, and it hasn't for, I would say, at least 15 years, if not longer. But back then you had to participate. That's why it was such a dangerous organization, because everybody in there were killers. If not one body, some of them had 50 bodies.
Sure. Were you constantly looking over your shoulder, not only law enforcement, but people that you work with? Who's a rat, who's not a rat?
You don't look over your shoulders, but you're very cautious. As far as like talking to people, I always, when I talk to, especially after the violence, before the violence, you don't care. It was like you wake up every day, life is great.
Yeah.
You hustle, you go play golf, you go eat dinner, it's just smoke cigars. And there was no murders yet, no violence. And so you don't care if the cops are following you, because what are they going to do?
Yeah.
They're going to arrest you and you're going to get probation or maybe a little jail time, not much. Because it's all those rackets I told you don't carry, sports gambling, loan sharking without violence, numbers business, marijuana, but they don't carry any significant jail time.
Right.
So you're never looking over your shoulder. When the murders happen and the violence happen, now you start becoming more cautious.
Sure.
Now the people you talk to, you think you're talking to a potential informant, so you talk to them like they have a wire on. Or if you're doing business, you're just more cautious. Not looking over your shoulder. You're just more cautious of the presence of where they are and things like that.
Okay. So you did eventually become a made man. So what was the act that you kind of showed your stripes that you were a loyal member?
In 2003, Bruno was having a fallout with the bosses in New York, and they were looking to replace him. And I was getting closer with the bosses in New York, and they really took to liking to me because they were sending people up here to look at the area of what Bruno was controlling. And they never did that before, but they started doing that with this one boss in New York, in particular, Arillotta. And he was sending up this guy named John Bologna, who it turns out was an informant.
Oh.
And we got word that he was an informant, and it's a long story, but the quick version is we asked permission to kill him, and Artie protected him. And that guy and Artie, between Artie and John Bologna, they were trying to steal our area and siphon all the money, most of the money down to New York for them.
Okay. And
so Bruno was falling out of line with them. They were looking to demote him, that's all. And they knew that I had the biggest crew. I had, all legitimate, I had restaurants and nightclubs, and I was making lots of money on the street, and I was known throughout Connecticut and all of Mass, and, going, through other surrounding states. They knew I was the guy in that area. And so they wanted me to be formally with them. And the only way they could do that is to make me a made man. But I had to participate in a murder in New York City, shooting of a union official that was that angered the boss, like I said, Artie Nigra. So he summoned me down to New York and told me he wanted me to kill this guy. He originally wanted to use these two local guys, Reno Saravalo and Joey Bazil, which, by the way, Joey Bazil cooperated, him and his brother Johnny cooperated with the government. Okay, so that's a fact, 100%.
Okay.
Just look up Johnny Bazil's case with Richie Finelli, and he ended up getting Tom Butters as the lawyer. So, and Joey Bazil testified at the grand jury. Anyways, they didn't participate in the murder. I had to get my two friends, which are Greek, Ty and Freddie Gias. They participated in the shooting with me, and that's how I ended up getting made into the family.
Right. And there's an actual ceremony, right, where it's kind of the pinprick, the blood and the fire, and they're asking you if we need you, you're going to leave your wife, and that's all legit, right?
A gun and a knife on the table.
That's some motorcycle behind us.
There's bosses sitting at the table.
Yeah.
There's captains around in the room. There's soldiers or other captains outside of the building where you're at. So, and then you walk in, there's a gun and knife on the table, and you swear your allegiance and take an oath to the family. And, basically, would you kill your brother if we asked you? Would you, the family comes first. The Cosa Nostra comes first before anything. We're all a brotherhood now. It's a secret society, and nothing else in life matters but the Cosa Nostra. And that's what I took an oath to that's what I got made into.
Right.
Yeah.
So that leads me into my next thing. How are you able to sit here, talk to me, be on podcasts? Because don't they, if you start doing that, isn't that kind of like frowned upon, where they're going to maybe take you out? Are you in danger? Do you ever worry about that?
So the course of that, I got made in 03, and right when I got made, like I said, there was murders that happened. There was deceit amongst our own circle with the bosses, Artie and John Bologna, with him having him as an informant around us and protecting him, and totally, was coming up and really destroyed. I could go on and about this.
Yeah.
It's in the book, South End Syndicate, a lot of it, but,
Yeah.
I picked up, Bruno got killed in 03, I got arrested 2 days later. 03, I got indicted, racketeering case. Then I got indicted in 05 for another racketeering case by the feds. Then I got indicted again by the state. So I got 3 cases pending. I plead guilty. I get 3.5 years in the state, 29 months in the feds. I go to prison. While I'm in prison, I get indicted for an extortion case. I take that to trial. I get found not guilty.
Okay.
I get out of prison in 2008, and I pretty much I was all set with the mafia as far as, I wanted to get into legitimate businesses. I cared about my family more. And I wanted to, somehow break away. I never had a chance because all the things I told you about the guy, John Bologna, being an informant, and plus numerous other people that agreed to testify. I got indicted for the Bruno murder in 2010. While I was in there, I knew I was never getting out of prison. I faced the death penalty case. I seen all the informants on the list, including dozens and dozens from the Springfield area, Connecticut area.
Yep.
John Bologna, they had Felix Tranchese, he was a made guy. They had Ray Ruggiero, another made guy. They had the shooter, Frankie Roach. John Bologna wearing a wire on us. So we were dead men walking for sure, 100%.
Yep.
And I got offered a deal by the government, and I ended up taking the deal. Long story short, it was a lot harder decision than that.
Yeah.
The hard part, I look back and I was like, what the hell was so hard about that decision when I could be a free man out here walking? They're giving me that chance.
Right.
And I'm thinking about not taking it when I know it's 100% you're going to prison the rest of your life. The only hard part I had was, I had 3 guys locally that were going to be indicted with me, and I didn't want to see them go to prison. I tried to form and tell them. I did tell them ahead of time, and this is all documented in papers and news stations and interviews, that I reached out to them 2 months before I struck a deal with the government and told them what I was going to do, told them all the evidence that they had on us and all the witnesses that they had, and told them to join me in making a deal with the government.
Yeah, and that's Freddie and Ty.
And that's Freddie, Ty, and Emilio Fusco.
Yep.
And Emilio chose to flee and go to Italy. They ended up catching him out there.
Right.
And Freddie and Ty chose to roll the dice and take it to trial. And maybe they were going to, they were thinking they were going to beat the case. It was impossible to beat the case.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a 99.9. It wasn't even 99.9. It was 100% conviction we were going to get. So that's how I'm out here talking to you.
All right. And part of that deal was you knew where a couple bodies were in Agawam, I think Agawam specifically, right? And you were able to kind of, they found the body shortly after that. So that was part of your deal as well, too. It's truly an amazing story all around. You've written a book. Tell me about that process a little bit.
I wrote a book called South End Syndicate. And the reason for wanting to write a book, and again, this is not glamorizing the life. I'm so happy I'm out of that life. It's a life of destruction. The families are the ones that suffer in that life. But the mafia was a fascinating organization, and people are very fascinated with it. Going back to the 20s up until you got Al Capone and Lucky Luciano, you got the John Gottis and the Vincent Chin Gigantes, and it was throughout the whole country, and it was worldwide. It was in all other countries as well. So, Italy, and so you never heard anything or any stories written on Western Mass, Connecticut. Yeah. You hear a lot of the bigger cities, and I was in prison federally with all these top mobsters. I was cellmates with one of the biggest bosses, Joe Massino. He was the boss of the Bananos. He was on the commission. Okay. And all these guys, and I was around our guys locally, Connecticut, and the guys here were more, to me, were just the same, if not, they were equal to them. And you never hear any story, when it came to murder, when it came to making money, when it came to power, when it came to all of that stuff, these guys, held their own weight. And I always said Springfield was like an empire within an empire because they didn't have other families competing with them. So they had Connecticut, they had Western Mass, but they didn't have 5 other families fighting over the same, 2 cents on the street, the millions, to make. So,
I mean, the patriarchas out in the Eastern Mass, the Whitey Bulger, the Winter Hill, that's well documented. There's movies, it's numerous books about those things. But you're right, you get west of Worcester, and it's kind of like they think dragons live out here, and they don't know that there's a whole society that lives out here.
And you go even up into Connecticut, that was Genovese family controlled, but you had back in the 80s and 90s, you had a lot of patriarchas, and you had a lot, some Gambinos further up and some Colombos, but it was a big powerhouse for, again, the Genovese family. We worked all the way up through Connecticut, especially when they took the pinch. The patriarchas got arrested in the 90s. That's when we really started going heavy. Me and my crew started going deep into Connecticut. I had restaurants and nightclubs there, and all the way leading up into New York. So there was no competition. And when you look back at the notorious criminals, gangsters that came out, you could, these guys are just as notorious as a John Gotti. Billy Grasso, Whitey Tropiano, Big No Sam Kafari, even like Skyballs, and even Bruno. Bruno was known, these guys were known nationwide. Bruno took me to Florida. You go on away, he was on the boat with Nicky Scarfo, the boss of Philly.
Okay.
They worked hand in hand with the Philly mob. So they were known nationwide, and this is before cell phones and, social media and any connections like that. This was all pay phones and, meeting in person and setting up all these businesses. So I wanted to get the story out and let the mob, there's a big following out there of mob enthusiasts that are very, the people are always fascinated by mob movies, and you see Goodfellas come out, The Godfather and things like that, and so
it's an interesting lifestyle, right? I mean, it's just like it's kind of that fear factor that there's money, there's women, there's money, there's drugs, there's everything involved in
it's a great lifestyle until it's not a great lifestyle. Until the prison time comes, until somebody gets killed and their family, the family members suffer, the wives, the kids, the family have to bury now, or if they even find them. Some murders they don't even find them.
Right.
And it's a great life, but you can't survive it. I know some bosses did, but that's because they stepped back and they didn't have the law enforcement techniques that they had back in the 50s and 60s. If they had what they had today, those bosses back in the 50s wouldn't have lasted a year with them.
Right, exactly. So regarding the murder, let's talk about Al. Al Bruno was the head here. He was murdered, gunned down at the social club in town here. You're very familiar with that, obviously. So take us through that process, because wasn't somebody else assigned to take care of that, but then that just wasn't happening, so your crew kind of got assigned?
I've told this story so many times, and you still got people that think they know more than me about the story, that they know more than I would know or I should know.
Yep.
First of all, Al Bruno, I told you earlier, he was just going to get taken down, demoted from a boss to a soldier. That's all that was going to happen to him. There was another faction that was going to court to get sentenced. A made guy, Emilio Fusco, goes to get sentenced. They give him more time than he was looking at. Gave him like an extra 9 months to a year.
Yep.
He wants to know why. They said he's a made guy. He denied it. They show him a 302 with Al Bruno talking to a federal agent at Red Rose Pizzeria.
Which for 302 is a confidential informant for the FBI.
The federal FBI has to put down, and they call those 302s whenever they interact with a source on the streets, and even if it's by chance, not to say Al was an informant with a number and was on their payroll. No, but they still have to
stop over here.
They still have to log that in and put that in as a 302 to let them know that the information they got. And in this 302 was really bad stuff. And if you ask 100 out of 100 gangsters, people that know that life, 100 will tell you that Bruno cooperated as a dead man.
Yeah.
Now, to the extent of his cooperation, was he an informant? Not at this particular time. What he did was, I want to say, an informant is somebody that is spying on the organization, giving back information to the government,
Yep.
That's what an informant is. You know, like I wasn't ever an informant. I ended up flipping, when the trial came, I became a cooperating witness and things like that. But you have informants that exist on the street that feed law enforcement information, and that's what they need to put the bad guys in jail. They need informants. Bruno, when Matty Ryan was alive, was using Matty Ryan in informative ways to get his rivals off the street. Skyball Schiavelli, Babbitt Schiavelli. When Big Nose Sam died, they took that advantage of Matty Ryan, and they were putting their rivals in prison. You know, you had the Pugliano factions, the Stones, the Campides, the Manzi. He had the old man deported. I mean, who do you think did that? You know, the guy was hiding out in Springfield, and they told him where he was hiding out. They deported him back to Italy. So was he an informant? No, but you know, did he use those tools like an informant? Yes. And he talked to an FBI agent, and like I said, you ask 100 people that know anything about the life, and they will tell you he's a dead man. It was he told. Yeah. And so now that motive, I just told you the motive. The motive was from Emilio Fusco because he got more time, not me. Okay. When that paper surfaces, he approaches me, he shows me the paper. I said, damn, it was a really bad paper. It had Bruno saying he was a made guy, whose other made guys were around, guys in Florida, you know, it was just a bad 302, and it's public too. Yeah. So Emilio brings the paper to Felix. Felix calls up the guy, John Bologna, that's around Artie Nigro, who's the boss in New York. They summons Felix to bring the paper down there, not me. When the Felix goes down and brings the paper, comes back, they summon him down again. This time he meets with they're using a panel in New York, 3 bosses. Mario Gigante, Larry Dentico, and Artie Nigro. When he went down there this last time, that's when the order, instead of taking down Bruno as a boss to a soldier, the order came in to kill Bruno. Okay. Who did the order get told to? Felix Tringhisi, not me. I wasn't at the meeting. So therefore, I have no involvement in any of this, right? And if Felix was any type of a gangster and he had a crew around him, which he didn't, he had nobody, he had guys that were big but couldn't shoot anybody. So but Felix, if he had a crew around him, I'm not even supposed to know that they put an order on Bruno. I'm supposed to wake up one day and Bruno's supposed to be dead, and I'm supposed to say what the hell happened. Because you're not going to tell anybody when there's a murder order, because you're going to implement. The more people that know, the worse you want to keep it secret. Right. If I got told to murder Bruno instead of Felix, I wouldn't have came back and told Felix. I would have just picked who was going to participate in with me, and then try to get it done with the less people involved. But he told Felix. Then he's got this other informant, John Bologna, which we asked to kill. He knows about it. Okay, you got the guy Ray Ruggiero, the captain, because it's a long stories, but Ray Ruggiero was a captain. They robbed Bruno prior to this for $250,000. So all this is coming into play. So now Felix gets the order. A few weeks go by, he can't get it done. I get sent for down in New York. That's when I pretend I don't know anything that's going on, but I know everything that's going on. Artie, I'm walking with him on the streets. He asked me, you know what's going on? I said, no. He goes, we're going to have to take out Bruno. You know, he goes, I want you to get involved and help Felix get it done. Okay. Don't get your hands dirty. Don't participate directly, and and just help Felix get it done. And that's how I got dragged into the Bruno murder.
Was that conflicting for you? Must have been. I mean, here you are, close with him, close with the family. Yeah. How did that set?
So again, me and Bruno had ups and downs, but he was like family to me. My father was very, very close with him. He was at my father's store 3-4 times a week. They played golf together. They got along really well. So, and I had no animosity towards him. I had no hatred towards the guy. You know, my thing, and at that time when this was going on, I was trying to kill the Manzi faction in a whole different matter. So my whole focus was, you told me to help Felix, but I was still trying to kill this other faction. And still going that way first. Forget about the Bruno murder. And then things just, so it was conflicting. I didn't want to see it happen. I didn't really care if it happened, like, as far as, I didn't think it was, in other words, I wasn't going hard into making it happen. Yeah. I got summons down again, and they said, what's going on with this? You know, at this meeting in New York, the guy, Ray Ruggiero, goes, when are you guys going to kill this Bruno? He keeps calling me, busting him about the $250,000 that they robbed him. over some cigarette deal. So, you know, Ray's asking about it, and they're asking, and so Freddie was in prison with this kid, Frankie. He said he could get it done, which he did, and Bruno ended up getting killed.
Right. So the actual night of the shooting, it was Freddie and Roach?
It was Roach. I believe he had this kid, Brandon, give him a ride down there, but Brandon didn't know anything about it. He just said give him a ride to the club. He parked down the street. Frankie went in and waited. When Bruno came out, he shot him and killed him. He ran to the car. He said, and I believe that Brendan didn't know anything about it. That's what I think. But so they took off. I'm sure he knew afterwards when Bruno got killed. You know, he was driving the guy that killed him.
Yeah.
But at that particular time, it was Brandon and Frankie, and I believe Freddie was like in the area.
Okay.
You know.
How did you find out that it happened?
My aunt ended up calling me. She heard it on a scanner, and that he got shot.
Okay. So at that point, you know that the deed was done. Do you immediately kind of become elevated to the head of the Springfield faction, or?
No. See, that was another thing that people don't understand. I got made in August of '03. I had all the power at that time, because you got to think of it. The reason I say I had all the power was because Bruno was getting demoted. He was boss, but only to like the people that don't know anything.
Yeah.
Oh, Bruno's the boss. Not even him, he knew it, that he was getting demoted. So he was gonna get demoted. And when I got made direct in New York City. I got made directly with the bosses of the family. So wouldn't that tell you, like, I'm direct now? I report to the bosses directly in New York City that run, if not the Genovese family, run everything. They're the most powerful family there is. So everybody knew in the inner circle that I had all the power. Bruno didn't have to be killed, or, you know, if that paper doesn't come out, I become still the most powerful guy in the area, Western Mass, Connecticut, and Bruno's just a soldier. And that's it. And he never gets killed. If that paper doesn't come out, Al Bruno doesn't get killed. People want to point the finger at me, point the finger at John Bologna, point the finger at Artie Nigro, point the finger at all the guys that hated Felix Stringese, the two brothers that all hated Bruno. Point the finger at them. That is the reason why Bruno got killed. You know, so like I said, I didn't need that murder to give me power. I already had all the power in Springfield. And the people that know, that, you know, that were in the know. Like the bosses in Providence, the bosses in Boston, Carmen D'Annunzio, the Big Cheese, Baby Shacks in Providence, the boss of the Patriarcha family. I got introduced to him, and as the guy in our area now, as a made guy. You know, they introduce you as a made man, and also that I'm the guy in Western Mass and Connecticut.
Right.
So the people in the know knew, you know, and we wanted to keep it on the low here because there's so many informants on the streets around here. Guys that your head would spin, that you would think like they're informants, and they walk around like, you know, pointing fingers at other people, but they're informants. Like I said, the Bazil brothers, and there's many, many other ones. So we wanted to keep it low for that fact, and keep the attention off, you know, off of me, and let it, you know, point it to somewhere else.
Right. Tell you, it's a fascinating story. It really is. So the book's available. Where can people buy the book if they're
the book's at all the Barnes and Noble. It's online, Amazon, and all the bookstores. I did like a few dozen book signings all throughout the whole Connecticut, Boston, you know, all throughout this Rhode Island. And so it's available like that. Could
this story, the book, develop into something further, something media-wise, entertainment-wise? So
we got a couple. We're in talks with a couple people. One of them, this guy who was the prosecutor on the case, Ellie Honig, he did a podcast called Up Against the Mob. So we got some offers on his podcast to do a series. Also on the book, we had a company reach out to us, wanted to buy the rights for the story to put it into a movie.
Okay.
So we're in talks with them. And a few other documentary series, things like that. We're in talks with a few of those.
Yeah, I've seen you've been doing a lot of podcasts. I know that. You've been kind of all over the place doing that. But you're also selling wine now too?
Yep, got into the wine business. I'm very proud of that. My father was the largest wine grape distributor. So I think that would make him proud that I'm, you know, getting into the wine business. It's called Pazzo, which means crazy in Italian. It's sold online. The link is on my Instagram. in there. Our winery, what's good about our wine is it's grown and made in America.
Okay.
So it's grown in Maryland. The winery's in Maryland. Beautiful, luxurious resort. We have 3 total wineries, one in New Jersey, and they're the oldest wineries in the country.
Oh wow.
I think the winery in Maryland, it was the first buildings to exist in America. Definitely in Maryland, but I want to say in America.
First winery type buildings?
No, I'm talking building itself.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
They go back to like the 1600s,
oh, wow.
before America was even, discover whatever they did with it.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's interesting.
And Renault is so old. They go back to the 1800s. They never closed, so we could actually make our own wine and call it champagne. You can't make a grape and call it champagne unless it comes from France, but the Renault winery can actually use champagne on their bottles because they're grandfathered in, that they never closed ever from the 1800s on. So
that's
if
amazing.
you never close as a winery, you can use that name, champagne.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll put a link down below too, so if people want to go check out that.
Yeah, and everyone's loving it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a Cabernet. I swear, if you know about wines, and I do, I used to have wine cellars, and the Cabernet is just like an Opus One.
Yeah.
An Insignia, Joseph Phelps, a silver. It's right along those lines of a top line, and it's those wines go for $300-400 a bottle.
Yeah.
So for the price,
that's
you're
cool.
gonna drink that quality.
So a kid from the South End, scrappy kid, gets himself mixed up in a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Still standing here today, telling the story, and now he's selling wine in a book.
Right.
It's pretty interesting, right? When you lay your head in the pillow at night, you just be like, how the hell did I get here?
Yeah, I always should have been here, in business sense. Like I look back and I just wish I didn't participate in the violence.
Yeah.
Like I said, business, I was always business. Always good at making money, and I just wish I stuck to that and put it in, like I said, into real estate, into other, restaurants, business. And I would have been maybe standing here, but, 100 times more wealthier, with a lot less...
Without having to talk to Chip Harrington from Ludlow, you wouldn't have to do that right now either.
Well, maybe we would still talk, but
we could.
Yeah.
We could be talking about our old cathedral days when we both got kicked out of school. So, well, hey, man, thanks. I appreciate you taking some time today to do it. It turned out to be a beautiful day. It really is. Yeah. I've never been down to this part of the Chicopee River. It's really, I'm Chicopee River,
and
Connecticut
you can walk
River.
up and down. It's too bad they don't build on this, like they do in other cities.
Yeah.
Springfield,
Yeah.
you go to, all these other cities that I travel to.
Yeah.
Downtown areas are thriving. New Haven.
Yep.
West Hartford, all the, Worcester's even thriving now.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Springfield can't make, the downtown area shitty. You can't even go downtown.
Yeah.
There's nothing here, is like it used to be. It declined, and everything else is inclining.
Yeah, well, it has been
When you
said.
change, and you got to run for mayor.
My political days are over. My political days are over, dude. Yeah. It has been said that ever since the mafia kind of got pushed out or moved around, that the city of Springfield changed, and not for the better. And some people have said that before. So.
Yeah, the mafia doesn't exist no more around here.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing here. The few people that do exist, it's not mafia, and they don't want nothing to do, with that. With any type of mafia. There's no structure, there's no boss, you can't make any money on the streets. Like we said, they're all legal now. What are you going to make money doing on the streets?
Yeah.
Unless you had it tied in from 20, 30 years ago and you still got residual customers, how are you going to make money? They go right over here and bet the MGM. And it's everywhere, casinos. And
like I said, the government, people say, it's the biggest organized crime network out there. So.
Yeah, marijuana's legal everywhere.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right there, I think, is the dispensary.
When we parked over at Max's and walked over here, all you could smell is weed. The whole thing.
Right there, I think it is, the dispensary.
Yep, that's all you can smell is weed. But
yeah.
But yeah, that's good. Thanks again, man. I appreciate it. That's going to do it for this week's show. I do got a YouTube channel. You can go like and subscribe down there, but most of this gets shared on social media. If you got any suggestions as to who you might want for future guests, shoot me a message and give me a call. Take care.